What if the school bully chose the wrong girl? Someone with a connection so powerful it could change everything. This moving story follows Maya Williams, a quiet new student who becomes the target of Bryce Carter, the most feared guy at school. He thinks she's an easy target, but what he doesn't know is that Maya holds a secret, one that will flip the script in the most surprising way. Stick around until the end because what begins with arrogance ends in downfall. Maya Williams stepped off the school bus, clutching her backpack straps as she looked up at the towering front entrance of Clearview High School in Houston, Texas. The crisp fall air carried the smell of freshly cut grass and sun-warmed pavement. Around her, students moved in groups, their conversations and laughter filling the morning air. But Maya felt detached, like she didn't belong. This wasn't her first new school, far from it. In fact, it was her fourth transfer in just 3 years. While most students moved because of their parents' careers, Maya moved because she needed another reset. Again, she kept her eyes down, hoping to avoid attention as she walked through the front doors. A few curious glances came her way, but she ignored them. Clearview High wasn't particularly unique, a large suburban school filled mostly with middle-class kids who had grown up together. The football team was respectable, the cheerleaders were admired, and the school's social order had long been established. But none of that mattered to Maya. She had only one goal: stay under the radar. Inside, the school buzzed with energy. Lockers banged shut, sneakers squeaked against the tile, and teachers tried to herd students into classrooms before the first bell rang. Maya moved through it all, focused on her schedule. She knew the routine well: find her locker, figure out the lunch layout, and most importantly, identify who to avoid. That's when she saw Bryce Carter. Tall, broad-shouldered, and full of effortless confidence, the kind only the most popular and untouchable students seemed to have. He was leaning against a row of lockers, surrounded by guys in Letterman jackets, all laughing at something he had just said. Even from across the hall, Maya could tell he had a presence. The kind that either made people admire him or fear him. She'd seen his type before. The golden boy, star quarterback, good looks, wealthy family. But there was more. The way the people around him laughed just a little too hard, the way they shifted nervously when he spoke. She recognized it. People didn't just respect him, they feared him. Maya had no intention of getting involved, but fate clearly had other plans. As she passed by, someone deliberately bumped into her shoulder. Her books flew to the ground, scattering across the floor. A few students paused to watch, some even laughed. She bent down quickly, cheeks burning. Well, what do we have here? She froze. She didn't need to look up to know whose voice that was. It's Carter. His tone was calm, almost playful, but with a sharpness underneath, like a cat playing with its prey. His friends chuckled behind him. Slowly, Maya looked up. Bryce stood over her, arms folded, wearing the smug grin she'd seen before on bullies who knew they ruled the hallways. "I don't think I've seen you around," he said. "You new?" Maya said nothing. She gathered her books, stood up, and walked past him without a word. But Bryce wasn't finished. "Hey, where's your manners?" he called after her, his voice echoing through the hallway. "I asked you a question." Maya kept walking. She'd dealt with people like him before. The best response was no response. But Bryce didn't take kindly to being ignored. She suddenly felt a tug on her backpack, just enough to stop her in her tracks, not enough to hurt. She turned around slowly. For a moment, the hallway seemed to go quiet. Even students who hadn't been watching now stopped to see what was happening. Maya met Bryce's eyes. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe even curiosity. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. Bryce raised an eyebrow and let out a slow, mocking laugh. "Oh yeah? And why's that?" She didn't answer. She simply held his stare. "You're kind of strange, you know that," Bryce said, tilting his head. His friend snickered. Maya turned and walked away. She didn't need to look back to know Bryce wasn't going to let this go. But he had no idea what kind of mistake he'd just made. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Maya stayed in the back of the classroom, spoke only when required, and avoided eye contact. She sat alone at lunch, choosing a spot near the edge of the cafeteria where she could observe unnoticed. Bryce and his crew owned the lunchroom. They sat at the largest table in the center, laughing loudly, as if nothing in the world could touch them. Now and then, Maya could feel his eyes drift in her direction, but he didn't say anything. Not yet. By the end of the day, Maya felt relieved to leave. The Houston heat lingered, making the pavement shimmer as she walked toward the bus stop. She had just reached for her phone when a voice called out behind her. "Hey, new girl." She turned around. Bryce stood there, hands in his pockets, that grin still on his face. Behind him, a few of his friends loitered, watching. Maya sighed. "What do you want?" Bryce stepped forward slowly. "You've got an attitude problem, you know that?" She didn't respond. His smirk widened. "What?" "You think you're better than me." Maya let out a small laugh. It wasn't nervous. It wasn't scared. It was genuine, and that threw Bryce off more than anything. "I think," she said, her voice calm, "you should walk away." For a split second, his smile faltered. Then he stepped closer, towering over her. "For her?" Bryce asked, confused. Maya leaned in slightly, her voice just above a whisper. "Because you have no idea who I am." Bryce chuckled and shook his head. "And who exactly are you?" Maya didn't reply. Instead, she stepped back, lifted her phone, and tapped a single button on the screen. Suddenly, the roar of an engine broke the quiet. A sleek black Dodge Charger Hellcat pulled up to the curb, the kind of car that made everyone stop and look. The tinted window rolled down slowly. And there he was, Vin Diesel. Bryce's grin disappeared instantly. Maya turned to him and, for the first time that day, smiled. "Still think I'm just weird?" she asked. Bryce didn't respond. For the first time in his life, he felt out of his depth. Maya watched as the confidence drained from his face, his jaw tightening. His eyes darted between her and the unmistakable figure in the driver's seat. The air shifted, heavier, more uncertain. The playful arrogance in Bryce's stance turned rigid. He took a step back. Behind him, his friends exchanged worried looks, none of them saying a word. Maya took her time. She adjusted her backpack strap and let out a slow breath, calm and unbothered, as if she hadn't just flipped the social order on its head. Vin Diesel didn't say a word at first. He sat with one hand resting on the wheel, eyes locked on Bryce. It was a look that said everything without speaking. Bryce swallowed hard. "No way," he mumbled under his breath, as if trying to convince himself it wasn't real. The usual bravado in his tone was gone, replaced with a subtle unease. He looked back at Maya, really looked like he was just now realizing something he should have seen all along. Maya leaned closer, her voice low and even. "Still think I'm just some random girl?" Bryce's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed again. His mouth opened, then closed, as if words failed him. Then Vin finally spoke. "Get in, kid." His tone was calm but firm. It wasn't a suggestion. Maya didn't hesitate. She walked past Bryce, past the hushed crowd now gathering, and opened the passenger door. The moment she slid in, Vin shifted gears. The Charger growled as it pulled away, leaving behind whispers and wide-eyed stares. Neither of them spoke for a while. Houston blurred outside the windows. The late afternoon sun cast streaks of gold and orange across the dashboard. Maya tapped her fingers gently against her knee and slowly let out the breath she'd been holding since she arrived at school. Vin kept his eyes on the road, tapping the steering wheel in time with some silent rhythm. "You okay?" he asked. Maya nodded. Then, after a moment, she gave a small laugh. "That was a bit much, wasn't it?" Vin smirked, the familiar half-grin forming. "A little." She shook her head and turned to the window. "I didn't mean for them to find out like that." Vin glanced over. "And what would have been better, letting a guy like that push you around?" Maya sighed, resting her head against the seat. "I wasn't going to let him. I was just waiting." Vin raised an eyebrow. "For what?" She shrugged. "The right time." He went quiet for a second, then chuckled softly. "You sound like me at your age." Maya turned to him, lips twitching into a smirk. "Now that's a terrifying thought." Vin laughed, a full, genuine laugh. "Smartass." They drove on in comfortable silence. The earlier tension faded as their usual rhythm returned. But Maya knew that just because the moment had passed didn't mean the issue was gone. Bryce Carter wasn't the type to back down forever. Fear often had a way of turning into something worse. When they pulled into the driveway, a sleek, modern house tucked in a quiet Houston neighborhood, Maya unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't move right away. Vin noticed. Something else bothering you? Maya hesitated before answering. To the world bare his heart. He's not done with me. Vin studied her face for a long moment. No, he said finally, voice steady. But you're not done with him either. She met his eyes. You think I should fight? Vin leaned back in his seat, resting one arm on the steering wheel. I think you should be ready. Guys like him, losing isn't something they handle well. Maya pressed her lips together, thinking. After a moment, she nodded. Yeah, I know. The next morning at school, Maya had braced herself for whispers. What she hadn't expected was how many people were whispering. As she moved through the halls, she could feel the weight of countless eyes drifting in her direction. The chatter moved through groups of students like sparks catching dry leaves. Some were just curious, others found it funny. And then there were Bryce's friends, clearly angry. She spotted them near the lockers, a tight circle of athletes and wannabe tough guys, each throwing her dirty looks. Bryce stood in the middle, leaning on the metal lockers, arms crossed. When he saw her, he didn't grin or say anything, he just stared. Maya didn't look away. She held his gaze just a moment longer than she had to, before walking past and heading to class. She heard the murmurs behind her, but didn't care. If Bryce was going to drag this out, she was willing to match him. By lunchtime, the situation had only gotten worse. Carrying her tray to an empty table, Maya passed Ryan, one of Bryce's buddies, a bulky linebacker with more strength than sense. He conveniently stuck his foot out. Maya tripped slightly but caught herself before she hit the ground, her tray clattering. A few students turned, watching quietly as their eyes bounced between her and the laughing group of jocks. Maya steadied herself and adjusted her tray. She didn't respond. That only seemed to bother them more. Ryan grinned. Nothing to say, princess. Maya exhaled, holding back a smirk. I didn't know cavemen were still around. The crowd let out a collective ooh, and Ryan's grin faded. Bryce, watching from a distance, tilted his head, clearly thinking through his next move. Maya didn't wait around. She walked past them, sat down at her table, and ate like nothing had happened. But she wasn't naive. She knew Bryce wouldn't let it end there. By the final bell, she was ready. So when she arrived at her locker and found it completely trashed, books on the floor, marker all over the metal, she wasn't shocked. She sighed, leaning on the locker beside hers. A few students lingered nearby, watching but not stepping in, curious to see what she'd do. Maya knelt down, picked up her books and stacked them carefully. Her hands were steady, her face calm. She could sense Bryce watching from across the hallway. She didn't give him anything. She closed her locker and walked away without a word. And somehow that seemed to throw him off more than anything else. That night, Maya sat at the kitchen table, drumming her fingers on the wooden surface. Vin Diesel leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her. Amy trashed my locker today, she said finally. Vin raised an eyebrow. That's the best they've got? Maya smiled slightly. For now, Vin nodded. So, what's your move? She paused, then returned the smile. We're going to let him bury himself. Vin grinned. That's my girl. Maya leaned back, the familiar sense of control returning, settling in like muscle memory. Because Bryce Carter had no idea who he was dealing with. He thought he was the one in control, but Maya was only getting started. She knew exactly what she was doing. She'd dealt with guys like Bryce before, loud, cocky, always performing for an audience to feed their ego. They thrived on getting reactions, on fear, on the illusion of dominance. But the truth? Guys like Bryce weren't nearly as untouchable as they wanted people to think. They slipped up. And Maya? She was patient. She'd let him keep pushing, let him dig his own hole, until he couldn't climb out. The next morning, she strolled into Clearview High like nothing had happened. The whispers were still there, but different now. Yesterday, they were about the girl who got picked up by Vin Diesel in a muscle car. Today, they were about what Bryce did to her locker. The school was divided. Some students thought it was funny, others saw Bryce as a joke, making a fool of himself. Maya could feel the shift. The second people started questioning the king's authority, his power began to crack. As usual, Bryce was leaning against the lockers, flanked by his crew of jocks. They were laughing, probably at someone else's expense. But as Maya walked by, the conversation hit a snag. Bryce's eyes flicked toward her, waiting for a glance, a flinch, anything to show she was still rattled by yesterday. She gave him nothing. She passed without hesitation. And just like that, his expression hardened. By lunchtime, the tension was building. Bryce wasn't used to being dismissed. He thrived on control, and Maya wasn't playing along. He needed something bigger, something public. So it wasn't a shock when she walked into the cafeteria and saw him at his usual table, that smug grin stretching across his face as he shouted, "Hey Maya, still crying over your little locker?" The cafeteria quieted. A few heads turned. Maya didn't even blink. She grabbed her tray and kept walking to her usual spot, but Bryce wasn't letting it go. "What? Can't handle it? Maybe your big bad daddy should come handle things for you." This got more attention. A few laughs, a few awkward glances. Maya finally turned to him, her voice calm. "Funny," she said. "You keep bringing up my dad like you're not the one who nearly wet yourself when he showed up." Silence. The whole room froze. Bryce's face darkened. His friends shifted, unsure whether to laugh or look away. Maya took a slow bite of her food, eyes still locked on Bryce. She wanted him to feel it, that sting of humiliation, the discomfort, because guys like him didn't know how to deal with being the joke. Bryce clenched his jaw, then forced a laugh. It came out tight, strained. "You think you're tough, huh?" he snapped. "Walking around like you own the place just 'cause some famous rich daddy picked you up in a fancy car?" His voice carried loud enough for the entire room. "You think you're better than us?" Maya tilted her head slightly. "No," she said. "I just don't have anything to prove." And that was the difference. Bryce had spent his whole life trying to prove he was the biggest, the strongest, the most untouchable. Maya didn't need to prove anything, because she already knew who she was. That, more than anything, infuriated him. She saw it in his body language, the moment he made up his mind, the way his shoulders tensed, the subtle clench of his fist before he forced himself to ease up. He wasn't done. He was planning something worse. And Maya, she was ready. After school, she walked slowly toward the parking lot. She knew Bryce would be waiting, and sure enough, there he was, leaning against his car, arms crossed, face unreadable. His friends weren't around this time. This was just between them. Maya stopped a few feet away, raising an eyebrow. "Let me guess," she said, "another brilliant speech about how I don't belong here?" Bryce let out a sharp breath through his nose. "No," he said. "I just want to ask one thing." Maya crossed her arms. "And what's that?" He studied her for a long moment, then finally said, "Why don't you ever push back?" His tone lacked the usual arrogance. It wasn't mocking or smug, just curious. Maya considered it, then shrugged. "Because I don't have to." Bryce scoffed, shaking his head. "That's not how this works, Williams. People like me, we push. People like you either push back or get crushed." Maya stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Or maybe people like me wait. We let you keep pushing, keep messing up, keep showing everyone just how weak you really are. And when you're standing in the wreckage you made, we don't have to do a thing. You've already taken yourself down." Bryce stared at her. For a brief second, she saw doubt. But he quickly masked it. "You think you've figured me out?" he said with a forced smirk. "You don't know anything about me." Maya studied him. "Maybe not, but I know you're scared." His body stiffened. "I'm not scared of you." Maya smiled coldly. "Not of me," she said. "Of fading away. Of losing. Of waking up and realizing no one cares unless you're putting someone else down. That's what really scares you, Bryce." His jaw tightened, nostrils flaring. She could see the battle in his eyes, the urge to snap back, to reclaim control. But there was nothing left to say. He knew she was right. Maya shook her head. "I don't need to fight you, Bryce. You're already fighting yourself." She turned and walked off. For the first time since meeting him, Bryce had no comeback. That night, Maya sat at the kitchen table, swirling ice in her glass. Vin Diesel leaned against the counter, watching. "Something happened today?" he asked. Maya nodded. "With Bryce." Vin raised an eyebrow. "I think I got in his head." Vin smirked. Maya exhaled. "But that doesn't mean he's finished." Vin studied her, then walked over and sat across from her. You want this over? Maya frowned. What do you mean? He leaned forward slightly. You could end it now. Call him out, embarrass him in front of everyone. You've got more power than you think. Maya was quiet for a while, then finally shook her head. No, she said. I want him to end it himself. Vin grinned. Smart. Maya leaned back, stretching. Yeah, but it's going to take patience. Vin chuckled. Good thing you've got plenty. Maya smirked. Yeah, I do. She knew it was just a matter of time before Bryce Carter broke. He'd pushed and pushed, waiting for her to snap, but instead, he was the one coming apart. She noticed it, the way his eyes shifted when she walked into a room, how his shoulders tensed when her name came up, how his friends didn't laugh quite as loud at his jokes. He had always been the one in control, the one with the power, but now he was scrambling, trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. And the final nail in the coffin was coming 2 days later. The entire school was buzzing, well before Maya even stepped through the doors that morning. As she entered, she immediately sensed it. The hushed conversations, muffled laughter, groups of students whispering and casting quick glances toward the lockers. Something had clearly happened, and Maya had a pretty good idea of what it was. She made her way toward the crowd gathered around Bryce's locker. Students stood frozen, some snapping photos with their phones, others whispering in disbelief. Pinned across the metal door was a collage of printed screenshots, messages, comments, and private conversations. Every cruel, demeaning thing Bryce had ever said behind people's backs was on full display. Some messages targeted students he pretended to befriend, only to ridicule them in private. Others were worse. Offensive remarks about teachers, along with racist and sexist comments that no one could write off as jokes. But perhaps the most damning detail was the timestamps. These weren't from years ago. They were recent. Bryce shoved through the crowd, face pale, eyes wide as he took in what was posted. What the hell is this? His voice was sharp, hands shaking as he tore the papers from his locker. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Maya didn't say a word. She leaned against the locker across from his, arms crossed, silently watching. Watching as Bryce's carefully built image crumbled. Watching as those who once laughed at his jokes now looked at him with revulsion. Watching as his so-called friends began to drift away, unwilling to be associated with him. His eyes locked onto hers, no smug grin this time, no bravado, just raw, unfiltered rage. You did this, he growled, voice low and trembling. Maya tilted her head slightly. Did I? His nostrils flared. You think you're so clever, don't you? Think this makes you better than me? She stepped forward slowly, her voice even but firm. No, Bryce. I think this shows who you really are. The only difference is, now everyone else sees it too. His fists clenched at his sides, his entire body tense with fury. For a brief second, she thought he might lose control, might lash out at her right there in the hallway. But he didn't. He couldn't. Because if he did, it would only prove her right. Instead, he spun around and stormed off, pushing past the students as he went. But Maya knew, no matter how far he tried to run, there was no escaping this. His reign was over, and there would be no rebuilding it. That afternoon, as Maya walked out of school, she found Vin Diesel leaning against his Charger, waiting. His expression was calm, as always, but there was something new in his eyes, something proud. She slid into the passenger seat with a slow exhale. Vin didn't start the engine right away. He just looked at her. It's done, huh? Maya nodded. It's done. He studied her for a moment, then smirked. And you didn't even have to throw a punch. Maya smiled, resting her head against the seat. Didn't need to. He chuckled and finally turned the key. The Charger rumbled to life as they pulled away from the school. So, what now? Maya thought for a moment. She thought about the past few weeks, everything that had led up to this moment. Thought about how much had changed, not just with Bryce, but within herself. She turned to Vin, a small grin forming. Now I finally get to enjoy high school. Vin laughed, shaking his head. That's my girl. And as they sped down the road, the weight that had long pressed on Maya's shoulders finally lifted. She had won, not by being louder or tougher or cruel, but by being smart, by being patient, by letting the truth speak for itself. As for Bryce Carter, he became just another cautionary tale, a reminder that power built on fear never lasts. And sometimes, the ones you overlook are the ones you should watch most closely.